Hey everybody. Today I want to talk about pH and our nitrogen cycle. This topic comes up quite a lot in my live streams. I do a live stream every Friday night and Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. If you're interested in being able to chat with me live or troubleshoot any problems or whatever, I try to make myself available between 8 and 10 on Fridays and Sundays, so check that out if you're interested. But a topic that comes up quite often is carbonates, carbonate hardness, pH, the nitrogen cycle, and how the nitrogen cycle affects our pH in our tanks. And a lot of people seem to think that nitrate itself is acidic. And I've seen a few comments over the last couple of weeks that suggested likewise, and this morning was the icing on the cake. I was reading an article and it had nothing to do with the nitrogen cycle, but just out of the blue they happened to mention that nitrate is acidic, and if you have elevated levels of nitrate in your tank, this could cause your pH to crash. And that's just not true. It's not the nitrate itself. Nitrate is basically inert. It doesn't really affect much of anything, and it does not produce hydrogen ions. It does not give off hydrogen ions. Therefore, it's not acidic. For example, if you were to take sodium nitrate or potassium nitrate and you were to add that to your aquarium, you could run your nitrate levels up to 500, 600, 700 parts per million if you wanted, and that would have no impact on your pH whatsoever. The nitrate is not what's affecting your pH. What affects your pH is the nitrogen cycle. It's the cycle itself that is generating the hydrogen ions. And what pH is a measurement of the free hydrogen ions that are in your aquarium water. pH stands for the power of hydrogen, or some people say potential hydrogen, but usually it's considered the power of hydrogen, and that's what the pH stands for. So the more hydrogen you have, the lower the pH goes. So you can think of those hydrogen ions as being the acid in your tank. It doesn't actually work that way, but you can think of it that way in a generalized sense. So what happens is during your nitrogen cycle, as the ammonia is oxidized and gets changed into nitrite, hydrogen ions are released. And then when that nitrite gets oxidized and that gets changed into nitrate, hydrogen ions are released. So neither the nitrite, nor the nitrate, nor the ammonia are actually impacting your nitrogen cycle in and of themselves. It's the process of converting that ammonia down into nitrate that is actually releasing the hydrogen ions. So as long as your nitrogen cycle is functioning in your tank, as long as you've got fish in there, as long as you've got waste being produced and ammonia is being produced, and that ammonia is then being converted into nitrate, again, if you've got a functioning nitrogen cycle, you are just generating acid into your tank. You're constantly producing these hydrogen ions, and that's why we never see aquarium drift upwards. The pH never goes up over time unless you've added something or you've got substrate in there and you're trying to adjust upwards. The normal, natural progression of an aquarium will always be a downward drift in the pH, and that is because the tank is always producing acids. And so where that becomes important is how you provide the carbonates in your aquarium. The carbonates are your buffering capacity. The carbonates are what prevents the pH from dropping. So you want to keep at least 2 to 4 degrees carbonate hardness, even in a soft water, slightly acidic aquarium situation like I have. I still have some carbonate hardness in my tank. You don't want the pH to just free fall. And so those carbonates are like the antacids. And so every time a hydrogen ion comes in contact with one of the carbonates, they cancel each other out. So you lose the carbonate, but you also eliminate the hydrogen ion. And so if you've got a source of carbonates that's a finite source of carbonates, like say you're adding baking soda, which is sodium bicarbonate, or you're pouring a liquid solution in there that stabilizes the pH or whatever, these are finite sources of carbonates. You're putting a certain amount of carbonate into the tank, and immediately that begins interacting with the acid. So the acid is always being produced by your nitrogen cycle, but you've got a finite amount of carbonates in the tank, and so eventually those acids are going to counteract the antacids, the carbonates, and that carbonate level is going to begin to become depleted, and eventually you'll simply run out of carbonates altogether and you'll just be in pH free fall at that point. That's why if you're using additives to raise your carbonates, you need to keep an eye on that and you need to check it, because that additive immediately begins being diminished. It starts getting worked away at immediately. The way I add carbonates to my tanks is by adding a little bit of crushed coral. Now, this also adds hardness to the water. It's not just adding the carbonates, and that is your benefit of using an additive or using something like baking soda, is you're only affecting the pH. You're not affecting the water hardness at all. So when I use my crushed coral, I am adding minerals to the water. I am actually making the water harder in the process of bringing the pH up a little bit. But I only use a little bit. I keep the pH fairly low in my tanks. I keep the carbonates fairly low but stable. And the little amount of dissolved minerals, the calcium and the magnesium that I'm putting in my tank, don't really amount to much of anything. In fact, it's good for the fish to have a little bit of mineralization in the water. So again, I still keep my tanks acidic, I still keep my carbonates low, but the benefit of having the substrate in the tank is, just like the nitrogen cycle is always producing acid, the substrate that's either in this tank, I actually put the substrate directly in the tank. It's just in the back and you can't see it. But in a lot of my tanks, I put a little pouch inside the filter and I just allow the water to flow through it. So you can't see it, but I do have a little bit of crushed coral, calcium carbonate in my aquariums, and that's giving me a constant source of carbonates. So my nitrogen cycle is always producing acid, and now I've got some gravel, if you will. I've got some substrate in my tank that is always releasing carbonates. Now that will go away over time. You know, within a year that'll be gone, and I'll have to continually add it. But it's such a slow process. It's nothing like when you add baking soda. Baking soda, depending on how robust your cycle is and how heavily stocked your tank is, a little bit of baking soda can be gone within a matter of days or a week, depending on, again, how much acid is actually being produced in your tank. So keep that in mind. There are always hydrogen ions being released into your water, and so the tendency is always going to be to want to drift downwards. So you got to do something to stabilize that water to prevent a pH crash. Now, if you're somebody that has harder water already and you've got, you know, fairly hard water coming out of the ground or out of your tap, or you've got aragonite sand or something in your tank, then you don't have to worry about any of this. But if you're dealing with soft water and you're trying to keep a tank that's acidic and you're trying to keep that balance, it gets to be a fine balance. If you put a little too much substrate in there, you'll raise the hardness up, you'll bring the pH up probably higher than you might want it, and so you got to find that sweet spot of just how much substrate to put in there that releases just the right amount of carbonates that counteracts just the right amount of acid that's being produced based on your tank. It's going to be based on how many plants you have, your lighting, your nutrient loads, your stocking density, how you feed it. Every single tank is unique, and so I can't give you any specifics of how much to use, but start small. In a tank like this, I have this is a 125-gallon tank, and I literally have probably one measuring cup, you know, just a standard cup of crushed coral gravel sprinkled in the back there. It's not a lot, and I've probably got 2 degrees. This is one of my more acidic tanks, even though I do a lot of water changes and stuff on it. The acid always kind of raises up in this tank. It's pretty heavily stocked, etc. And so with that little bit of carbonates in there, it keeps it stable, but my pH is around 6 to 6.4 in this tank. It just never really goes below that. I've never had a crash in my pH, and that's with just a little bit of the calcium carbonate. So remember, a little goes a long way. Start small. If you put a big pouch in a 55-gallon tank, you're likely to find within 3 or 4 days your pH is up to 7.8. nitrate and you're getting, 6 or 7 degrees hardness in your water. So be mindful of that. It is a balancing act. But I just wanted to tease apart the idea that the nitrate itself is acidic. It's not. Again, you can dump sodium nitrate in your tank all day long and it won't affect your pH at all. It's the nitrogen cycle that is generating the acids in your tank. So I would be interested to hear your thoughts down below. Hopefully that was helpful to you. Hopefully that didn't confuse things even further. I tended to have a tendency to do that sometimes. Any questions or whatever, you can feel free to leave a comment down below. I try to get to all the comments that I get notified about, of course. And as I said, I do a live stream every Friday night and Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern time, and again I try to make myself available for questions, troubleshooting, etc., etc. So if you want to further this conversation, by all means stop by then and we can have a real-time chat about it, because this is a topic that I find very interesting. I can always talk about this kind of stuff. So thanks for watching this one. Don't forget to hit all them buttons down below, hit the likes and comments and all that good stuff. Thanks for watching. I'll see you real soon in the next one.